Hi, everyone. We'll let people just come into the room.
As everyone's circulating, I'm sure that you've seen this link, but I will just drop the link to the application in the chat.
Might have to do it again too, because only people who are on can get it.
Of course. And
Hey, welcome. Hopefully you're here to learn more about the UC National Center's fellowship program. We're going to give people another minute to join, and then we'll introduce ourselves and we'll get started. Everyone is welcome to put questions into the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer all of them. I'm just gonna start by introducing myself, and then I'll let Melanie and Brian and Beth introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Michelle Deutschman. I'm the Executive Director of the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement, and I am super excited that all of you are here and that so many people are interested in what I think is a wonderful fellows program, but obviously I'm not objective. So a little about me. I've been in my role, in this role as the Executive Director since 2018. Before that, I worked at a nonprofit and focused on First Amendment, Establishment Clause, hate crimes, and bias reporting. I'm a lawyer by training, but I say I'm always a good kind of lawyer. We have two good kind of lawyers on this today. But before we get to our second good lawyer, I'm going to pass it over to Melanie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Really nice to have you with us. My name is Melanie Zement. I use she, her pronouns, and I work with Michelle at the center, keeping all of the background emails, Zooms, podcasts running smoothly, and working on our voice program, which is our UC facing program. So really happy to have you all with us and excited to get to help answer your questions. There are captions available if you need to turn those on. It's at the bottom, and also a Q&A for you to pop your questions into. So thank you.
One of you guys can jump in.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Socek. I'm a law professor at University of California, Davis, and I was a fellow at the center 5 years ago now, right as COVID was starting, the 2019-2020 cohort.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bethany House. I am a faculty member at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in higher education administration. I was in the COVID cohort as well. I think it was 2020, 2021, but the pandemic's all very blurry. And then I was also a senior fellow 2022 to 2023. And I will just let you all know, like, I'm having some COVID flashbacks today because it is 0 degrees in Nebraska. Schools are all closed, so I'm at home with kids and dogs. So apologies in advance if any of them show up on the Zoom.
No apologies needed. So I think obviously the fact that Brian and Beth were both fellows multiple years ago and are still engaged, I think speaks to the continuity of our fellows community, and I think one of the keys. But before I let them tell you about their projects and the application, I'm going to take you through some of the basics about the center. Really, our mission is to explore the intersection of expression, engagement, and democratic learning, and consider what can be done to restore trust in the value of free speech on college campuses and in society at large. I don't think I need to tell everyone that this is a heavy lift now, and I believe that our mission is more important than ever. And we fulfill our mission a number of ways, including through webinars, through our Speech Matters podcast, through our annual conference that's coming up, through the Voice program, which is our UC program, and then through our national year-long fellowship program, which is what we're here to talk about today. I want to share that I think the three keys to the center in our work really are education, research, and community. And I think one of the things that makes us unique is that this center is looking specifically through the lens of higher education. So the work that we do always has a nexus to what's happening in higher education, which I believe is really a microcosm of things that are happening in society at large. So in terms of our fellows program, we welcome candidates from all backgrounds to apply, and we invite a wide range of innovative projects. So there's been many questions. Do you take qualitative research? Do you take quantitative research? Does it have to be social science research? So no, it does not. And yes, we take all kinds of different types of projects. I think that's one of the unique things is we have not just academics in our program, we also have graduate students. We also have practitioners. As part of the University of California, we're committed to promoting equal opportunity and diversity in education, services and administration, as well as research and creative activity. We're focused on projects that address current issues affecting students, staff, administrators, and faculty, and that will have a direct impact on individuals and communities across campuses. So as I said before, work products can take a number of different forms: research, curricular models, toolkits, training pilots. To give you a sense, we've had almost 70 fellows across 7 classes. 36 have been faculty, 7 in student affairs or higher education administrators, 12 graduate students, 1 undergrad, and then 12 nonprofit sort of advocacy civil society group participants. This is not a residential fellowship. Currently, we have funds for the fellows to meet in person once a year. The center awards each fellow $20,000. That $20,000 is really to compensate people for their time. People ask, does that get routed directly to you? Can it go to your university for a class buyout? Yes, all of the above, as long as we deal with taxes. And I can't answer specific questions about taxes because it varies per state. We also have up to $5,000 in research funds in order to complete the project. The research funds, unlike the $20,000, are by reimbursement only. So you cannot buy equipment, but otherwise people use the $5,000 for travel, for conference registration, for research assistance, for incentives for surveys, for transcripts, all kinds of different things. Let's see what else. The fellows meet monthly on Zoom, as well as needed with center staff or with the senior fellow. The role of the senior fellow is they're both doing a little bit of their own research, and Beth can talk about that, as well as helping the current class of fellows with anything that is related to their project. That could be creating survey design, it could be working on IRB approval, etc. So the idea is that throughout the year, there are people in the cohort and in the fellows community that can help assist as you kind of complete your project and then think about how you might use it in the future. I think the community aspect of the fellowship is really important. We try to keep people engaged through all fellow meetings. We have a book club. And I think the other thing is fellows collaborate on papers and conference panels outside of their fellowship year. So for instance, last month, I moderated a panel of 4 former fellows at AAC&U and how their work connected to democracy. We did something similar at the ASH conference in November on academic freedom. I know both Brian and Beth have actually presented work based on their fellowship at the FIRE faculty conference. The one-year fellowship runs from July 1, 2025 through June 30th. So it's a little odd because it's not an official academic year, it's the fiscal year. Lots of people ask, can you apply for a joint fellowship? So we have had many pairs in our years. The only caveat is the $20,000 award gets split, and there's only one pot of $5,000. And for those folks interested, for that, you submit a single application, but you include bios and resumes for both folks. I'm not going to read the topics, but if you've looked at the application, you'll see that we're particularly interested in certain issues this year. So I suggest people take a look at those. People are welcome to apply with other topics, as long as you know sort of where our focus is. And then I would say a couple words about the application. A lot of folks have asked about, how people are evaluated. We do have a selection committee, and all you need to do is to really answer the specifics in the application, and that is kind of how we evaluate. So I would say a couple things. One, I would say do some homework. We have all of the past fellows projects available for you to look at. If people want to reach out to past fellows, I imagine that they will be open to talking to you. Please follow the rules for the application. So if it says don't have your resume exceed 2 pages, please don't, because you will be disqualified. The second piece is a statement, and this is sort of kind of the key. Describing the proposed project, how it will further the national conversation related to expression and democratic participation. Kind of that's our mission on college campuses. What's the need for the project? What are the objectives? And what's the potential impact on campus communities? A third question talks about how your academic and professional experiences qualify you to complete the project. Okay, so this is a very individual question, and the answer is going to differ depending on, obviously, not just who you are, but what it is that you are trying to achieve. We also want people to explain how this fellowship will enable you to complete your project. In other words, is this something you're doing otherwise and you're going to do it no matter what? Or, this fellowship is going to contribute in a particular way. And the last thing is a timeline. And I would just say for the timeline, be realistic. Everybody who's part of the selection committee understands this is a 1-year fellowship and only so much can be done in 1 year. And so I think better to be realistic about what can be done than to overpromise something or promise something that clearly can't be accomplished. We do many things to try to further people's research and work product after the 1 year. That's why we developed the senior fellowship. That's why, as long as budget allows, we give, after you're a fellow, you get $1,500 the following year to be able, again, to use it for registration and travel at conferences. We're constantly trying to elevate the work of former fellows on social, on our website. And both, I hope Brian and Beth can speak to what that was like for them. So I think that's plenty for me. And I think I want to start by turning it over to each of them to talk a little bit about kind of their projects, how it was during the year, and what they've done with their projects since then. And I guess, Beth, I'll let you go first.
Okay. So my project, broadly for both my initial fellowship and the senior fellowship, focused on how students think about and navigate conversations about controversial issues in the classroom. And in thinking, I was reflecting back to how I developed the project to begin with, and it really came from my own frustration and curiosity in the sort of national conversation that was happening at the time, and I think is still happening to some extent, around the so-called crisis of student self-censorship on college campuses. A lot of this was based on survey data from organizations like FIRE or even Gallup. That just the surveys themselves and the questions that were being asked on those surveys didn't really connect then to what was being made of those data. I am a researcher, so I look at the appendices and I read the survey questions. And, there would be questions on these surveys like, how often do you hold back your opinion in class because you're afraid of how other people might respond? And then anything that wasn't never is considered this crisis of student self-censorship. But when I look at that question, the question that comes to my mind is who the heck says never, right? Who never holds themselves back from saying something because they're just kind of like sussing out the situation, right? Like, do I really know these people? How will people understand this? Do I really know how to say this in a way that other people will understand what I'm saying? Will this be misinterpreted? Is this just not the right time and place to say this particular thing? We all make decisions about what to say to whom, when, how, all the time because we're reasonable human beings who live in community with other reasonable human beings. And so I really wanted to dig into that and to understand like what are students actually thinking when they're answering these questions? And more importantly, what are they thinking when they're confronted with these decisions about when to speak up and when to stay quiet? And how do they also make judgments about other students' decisions on that question? And so my project was very much a typical social science research project, identified a critical gap in the literature, and then I designed a mixed methods research study that was predominantly focused on the qualitative methods. In my initial fellows project, I interviewed 16 students. And then for the senior fellow project, I was able to expand that a lot further to a total of 55 students across 7 different higher education institutions. And my focus in the initial fellowship was really about the process by which students are making these choices about speaking up or staying quiet. And then in the senior fellows project, I was focused more on the what I sort of came to understand as the moral complexities of classroom discussions. And this was really all from these interviews with the students. Um, let's see what else in terms of dissemination, like what I've been doing with the results of those projects. I of course wrote the fellows report for each of them. It's up on the center website. I did the center fellows in the field webinars to get to share my results with others. I also did a lot of talks and presentations on panels at different conferences, invited talks. And I wrote an op-ed for Inside Higher Ed, which is something I never thought that I would do, but I read an op-ed that someone else wrote, and it really made me angry. And so I wrote an op-ed in response because it touched on my fellowship work. And then I also turned the project report from my senior fellows project into a book chapter in an edited volume that is somewhere in the production right now. So that's a little bit about my project. Do you want me to also talk about like interacting with other fellows, that experience, or just start with the project for now?
Why don't we let Brian talk about his project and then you both can talk about interacting with the cohort and so forth. Thanks, Beth.
Uh, I am I've been so influenced by Beth's work, the work that she did in the project. I've cited it so many times, and I really don't think that I would have known it were we not brought together in our cohort or through the center. And I think this is getting ahead of myself, but I do think that that's one of the real strengths of the fellowship program is having a dozen or so people that are coming from so many different parts of higher education and beyond, and but parts of the university that don't always do a whole lot of talking. And so I'm just very grateful for that, because a lot of my work is also arises from these crisis narratives around speech on campus, and but my work is not in any way empirical or based on interviews or anything like that. And so knowing Beth's work really well and having that sort of thing to draw on has been hugely helpful to me. So I proposed a project that was about how institutional values, institutions of higher educational institutions, in expressing their values, what happens when that comes up against internal dissent? How do we reconcile a university's ability to say, act on and express its beliefs about diversity, equity, inclusion, for example, LGBT rights, things like this, while also respecting the academic freedom of those who have different views on those kinds of topics, those within the institution who don't necessarily agree with that direction that their institution is taking. And I had proposed two different projects that were relevant to that. And this is a good example of Michelle's advice earlier not to overpromise, because it turns out that I did overpromise. I ended up only publishing one of those two projects. I did a lot of research on the second. I had research assistants. We had done work, and partly that topic ended up going away. It was about California's travel ban, where we were not allowed as state employees to have state-funded travel to states that had passed anti-LGBT laws. And that law eventually went away. And so kind of pulled the rug from under it, that project. But the bigger problem was that I had really just promised too much, because my other topic, which I led off with, was about the issue of diversity statements in higher ed. So these are at UC mandatory requirements that people who are applying for jobs or people who are applying for advancement, for tenure, or some other kind of raise or advancement, submit along with their research statement and their teaching statement, some kind of statement in which they describe what contributions they've made in regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those were quite controversial. They still are here at UC, where I teach. I had no idea at the time that they would become part of presidential politics and that the White House would be issuing executive orders on this kind of thing, that state legislatures would be weighing in. All that was in the future at this point. What I knew at the time was that most of the dialogue the about these statements was happening in faculty meetings, committee meetings, blog posts, on Twitter, that kind of thing. And yet they were bringing what were distinctively legal claims. They were making those kinds of claims about viewpoint discrimination under the First Amendment, loyalty oaths, violation of academic freedom principles that were actually implicated really tough areas of law. And so as a law professor, I wanted to dive into that and figure out whether there are ways of doing diversity statements that didn't run afoul of all those allegations. And so that project ended up becoming something like an 80-page law review article, which I was able to produce during the fellowship year. So, I got that done, but then that that ate into the time of the other project that I thought I was going to be doing parallel to it. And so, again, be thoughtful about the scope of your the scope of your project. The upside, though, is that in part because of the center and the people I was meeting through the center and all of that, I was really pushed and was able to not just have that work product land in a law review where, it'd have a certain kind of audience, but to also give talks at panels and at conferences that I might not ordinarily otherwise had gone to. Michelle mentioned FIRE. Uh, all three of us did a panel together at Heterodox Academy uh, the following year. I did a debate for the Federalist Society. I realized all three of these organizations are probably perceived as being to the right of where I'm normally perceived. But that was a good thing in terms of bringing my project to some of its biggest critics, which was great. I was also, like Beth, published essay in my case, in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, the sort of 3,000 word version of my 50,000 word 45,000 word article, in order to give it just a much different audience. And in fact, to get it to the kind of audience that I had gotten used to talking to through my center cohort, people that are in different parts of the university other than in addition to faculty.
Can I piggyback on that real quick, and I promise that Brian and I did not plan in advance to be so complimentary to each other, but I think it's one of the biggest advantages of the fellowship is exactly what Brian was just talking about, this ability to speak to different audiences and get your work to different audiences, and then to learn from people that you wouldn't normally, whose work you wouldn't normally encounter. I tried to read Brian's 80-page law review article. I will admit that I did not get through it all. And so I never would have really benefited from what I think are pretty spectacular arguments that he makes about academic freedom and viewpoint diversity in the context of diversity statements, but that extend well beyond that particular context. And I have been able to share those ideas and his work with a lot of my colleagues in higher education. And so I think the cross-pollination of ideas is really awesome. It's really pushed my thinking. It's really challenged things that I used to think and now think differently about because of the fellowship. And so more than the like funding or the research that it's enabled for me, the value of those connections and that network and that learning is just really amazing.
And I promise they're saying all of this voluntarily. I do want to add, for those of you listening, I'm imagining how I might feel if I was coming to this webinar and thinking, oh my gosh, these people have done all of these things. And so I just want to remind people that, like, I don't want to speak for Beth and Brian, but I don't know that either of them would have known where their projects would have taken them. And that's part of it, is that there is this sort of organic, iterative nature of it. So I don't want people to feel like intimidated, like, oh, I can't write an op-ed and a publication paper and go to conferences, right? This is something that's like, it builds on it.
This has been over like 5 years. That wasn't all in 1 year. Did the research, and then like so many other opportunities have come of that sense.
I will say one thing that I see in common in a lot of the fellows is, though, a desire to have their work take some kind of form that will be helpful or will help make their research part of a broader conversation. And that's great because, as you just heard, uh, most fellows, first of all, aren't writing 70 or 80-page law review articles. That's not what most of these fellowships go towards. But, some people are doing things that are part of a larger book or other kind of project. And I think what a lot of fellows end up doing is just finding ways to get at least chunks of that work out to a broader audience, or for some fellows, put in a form that can be used as a teaching module or some kind of model policy or something that could be concretely helpful to people in higher ed or people that are having conversations about higher ed.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions. So I'm thinking what I'll do, unless there's something else that Beth and Brian want to say before we stop the recording, I think we will kind of turn that off. I think just everyone is more